next steps after the conference is over. So I'd like to thank our sponsors, all of them who made this event possible. We fundraise each time we do this, so it really matters to have the support of all the different organizations. And a particular thanks to the School of Forestry and Dean Indy Burke and the Dean's Office broadly, and to the School of Management as well. And Sarah is working right now, but she is the Assistant Dean of Academic Affairs and Research and Sustainability, and this event would not be possible without her. I'd also like to thank Stu DeQ and the Center for Business and the Environment, not only for their constant support of our work at the intersection of business and environment, but also for yesterday's pitch competition support. I'd like to thank the staff, in particular Jen Zuccaro, Nicole Abubakar, and Carly Summers for all of their work behind the scenes with the logistics to make these 2 days possible. Will Walker from IT Management, our photographers, Claudia Sanchez de Lozada and Shimul Bijor, to the Environmental Film Festival at Yale. For those of you who were able to stay for the film, I think it was a good time yesterday. And to all of these speakers, it takes a lot of time and effort and planning to speak for even 10 minutes, to organize your slides, to prepare a 1-hour presentation. So thank you to everyone. To my student co-organizers, Noma Moyo and Morgan Pierce, thank you for everything that you've done. And to all of our volunteer organizers, many of whom were pulling double duty, not only organizing panels, but serving as moderators or facilitators, putting together workshops. So we have Marley Eisler, Emma Din, Augustine Carbo, Michael Davies, Georgia Silvera Siemens, Melissa Goodall, Lindsay Crum, Tim Mason, Wilder Person, Ben Soltoff, Forrest Abbott-Lum, Derry Allen, Mark Donnan, Eileen Quigley, Bruce Phillips, Dan Marash, Noah Walker, Kevin Lee, Matt Daly, and Chip Spears. So if we could all just take a moment to thank everyone who organized YES to make it possible. I'd also like to say a special congratulations to Raise Green for winning yesterday's, I guess, the first annual Eco Entrepreneurs Pitch Competition. So congratulations to Matt and Franz, and thank you to all of the teams that pitched and are just continuing to push forward on the innovation and environment intersection on behalf of Yale. And a special thanks to Blue Ivy Ventures for sponsoring the prize and for being another example of what happens when alumni come together. So as far as next steps, so next week you'll receive, well, I'll say next week, I'll say that approximately. You'll receive a survey and just giving us some feedback about how you think YES went, some of the priorities that you'd like to see for 2021, hopefully. And many of you have asked about content, slides, and recordings and other things that have come out of the last day and a half. So we'll make everything that we can available. We're just checking with the different speakers and seeing what we can share with you all more publicly. And then, last but certainly not least, I just want to underscore that this is an alumni effort. Of course, we have students engaged, but this is something that is really unique to the environmental community at Yale. No other part of the alumni community does an event like this, putting together something from scratch. This is the third time that this has happened. We've had a mix of leadership in 2015, 2017, and this year. So it really happens because you want it to happen and because people come out. So if you're interested in thinking about the way that YES can or should evolve for future years, or if you're really looking to fill up your 2021 calendar right now, please come and speak to me about how to get involved. And everybody can put their stamp on it in the same way that we heard about the YBG Sustainability Initiative this morning. This is our this is our event. So it can and should be what we want to make of it. And sometimes 2 years feels like a long time. So what can or should we be doing in the interim to keep the energy going and to keep everyone connected? So I just again want to say thank you to everybody who has made YES possible, and looking forward to another half day of programming. So the first thing that's up for today is the plenary discussion, Reimagining the Environmental Enterprise. So Thank you and welcome. So, panel, go.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Good, good. I'm Derry Allen, and it's my pleasure to moderate this panel, as Lauren said, Reimagining the Environmental Enterprise. This is a key part of the theme of this conference, Dispatches from the Future. And this is going to well, this is the second day of YES, and we're going to be building on and integrating some of the ideas that we talked about in the first day of YES. To introduce myself, I'm a graduate of Yale College back in the last ice age sometime when nobody had ever heard of global warming. Among the things that I've done in my career, I spent 37 years at EPA. And retired a couple of years ago. And I live in Washington, D.C., and given how the World Series went this week, I'm glad to be playing an away game. I'm going to introduce the topic and what we mean by the environmental enterprise, and then talk a little bit about the evolving role on the federal side, especially EPA, and then I'm going to yield to the panelists, and then after they've each put out a few ideas, well, I may ask the panel some questions and give them a chance to perhaps react to each other, and then we'll open it up for a full discussion. And it's a big topic, so I know that people have a lot to say. Fortunately, after lunch, there's going to be a brainstorming session that is on this same topic. So if you like what you hear now, you'll have an opportunity with the panelists to talk about it further with all of us. My own remarks are going to be along the lines of an essay that I co-authored in the new book that perhaps many of you have seen from the Yale Environmental Dialogue, A Better Planet. And that essay is called Focusing the Environmental Protection Enterprise to Put Ideas and Policies into Action. And the gist of our argument is that meeting our environmental and sustainability goals is going to require the thousands of public and private organizations as well as individuals to apply their energy, their passions together with perhaps a better focus than there is right now. And in this essay and in this panel, we'll explore how federal, state, local governments, the private sector, the non-governmental organizations, universities and research institutions, etc., might stimulate in a better fashion large-scale collective transformative action. And our panel members this morning, and most of you, members of the audience, are part of this enterprise. And so this is a very relevant, at least I hope it's a very relevant conversation for everyone here. So in connection with the federal part and just the understanding the enterprise as a whole, I want to just make 3 brief points. The first point is that if we want to make serious progress towards a sustainable future, that we must think about both policy and implementation by all parts of this enterprise. And policy ideas are important, but so is implementation, which is what keeps policy ideas from just being dreams. And in this Better Planet book, there are a lot of really interesting policy ideas. Implementation is only touched on in a couple explicitly. I recommend Dean Indy Burke's epilogue and Brad Gentry's essay on networks. And together, these essays, I think, make some very complementary points. Big ideas do take hard work, and they take focused coordination to implement. And if we really want to change our energy system, if we really want to clean up the water, if we really want to implement a circular economy, those are really big. Thousands of groups are going to have to work together better as a team. And that's the only way that it can happen. And this point is frequently understood by the people who are involved in it, but often is not terribly well understood. So point 2, there's some history here, and it matters. A half century ago, new programs to protect the environment emerged from a partnership between the federal government, state governments, and a fairly small number of NGOs, and working together, but a lot on what was called yesterday top-down regulation. And this new enterprise worked fairly well to implement some of the really big ideas of the 1970s, things like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and so forth. And by most measures, the quality of the air and the quality of the water today is a lot better than it was before. Today, 50 years later, while EPA and the states remain central to the enterprise, many thousands of public and private entities have joined to add new capacity to the enterprise and new dimensions to environmental improvements. However, the growth has been somewhat random. And while many of the entities are doing great things on their own, they're often doing that in their own ways, and they're not very focused together to address today's challenges. A lot of these challenges are systems challenges. They're harder to address than the comparatively simple problems of how do you clean up this particular pollutant from that kind of a source and so forth. And that's the task for which the enterprise was originally designed. So addressing climate change, for instance, heads the list of challenges, but it's not the only one that we've got, and you know the list of those. So continued progress is going to require, as I mentioned earlier, changes in the economy and society to avoid creating environmental threats in the first place. The enterprise uses new tools, as Dan Esty was talking about yesterday, and he discusses in his essay on red lights to green lights. The enterprise is more diverse today than it was before. The systems approaches that Marion Chertow, who talked yesterday, as well as Paul Anastas and Julie Zimmerman, who was up here on the stage yesterday, and others talk about, can only happen if this enterprise functions as a system. And as Deborah Cohn was talking about, there's an important role for citizens as well. Despite the enterprise's inherent capacity, the question increasingly is whether the enterprise is strong enough and focused enough to deliver the really big results that I was talking about. And focus is hard in a system that is based on both federalism and the free market. The enterprise has also got to navigate more than ever political polarization, debates about the role of science, and government budget uncertainty. So it makes it very hard. So point 3, there are some things that we can do. First of all, we can communicate a sense of urgency, and I think that's come through a lot here in this conference. We can develop shared principles and goals as a way of bringing this enterprise together. There's actually no shortage of them, but in the process of random growth, there's never been an articulation that has full concurrence and consensus. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are one attempt at the international level. The Green New Deal is an attempt at the national level. Rob Klee is going to talk about some attempts at the state level. And we can pay close attention also to the focus and strength of individual entities that constitute the enterprise. In this connection, I'd just like to say that one of the most underreported environmental stories today is about the hollowing out of institutions like the EPA and the staff, what's happening to the staff. It's a largely silent process. It's going on every day. My co-author on the article in here just left the EPA. Thursday was his last day. And it's going to take years to build up that expertise again. We can also think big and create new institutions, as we did in the 1970s. We can think about the evolving relationships between these institutions and how to make them into a high-functioning system. There's been talk at this conference about public-private partnerships. Well, these need to be emphasized more, and really a lot more. So to conclude, then the task of implementing policies is often seems boring to a lot of people, frankly, but it's essential. And what we describe will not replace political policymaking. It will not solve every problem. Many of the ideas are not brand new. But that said, big policy ideas do need imaginative and vigorous implementation. And I look forward to our discussion today. Now, to kick that discussion off in this panel, I want to just say a word about these folks. They all have experience to reflect on in one or more of the major parts of this enterprise. And they're also able to think about the evolution of the enterprise as a whole. Rob Klee, who's going to speak next, currently teaches here, and until recently he was commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And he actually has 3 Yale degrees. Anybody else here have 3 Yale degrees? Well, we're delighted to have Rob with us, both from the Forestry School and the Law School. Tom Emmons will speak after Rob is a Yale College classmate of mine, and he's worked at several investment companies in his career, and for many years he has specialized in investing in renewable energy. Today, I really do think that Tom and his colleagues have got to be considered a critical part of this enterprise. Kerry Cesareo here is a graduate of the Forestry School. Also, she's a vice president of the World Wildlife Fund in Washington. She has a career that has kept step with many of the changes in the world of environmental groups, and today more than ever she's looking ahead to the future of the non-governmental organizations like her own. And then we really wanted to get Lauren up on the stage instead of just all the work that she's done to organize this conference. So we've got her here. She's a graduate also of the Forestry School, and she's charted an interesting course along innovative paths within the enterprise, and she's going to share a few of her own thoughts about reimagining this enterprise. So with that, I'm going to sit down, turn it over to Rob, and look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Derry, for kicking us off. I have been told I have 6 or 7 minutes, so I wanted to give you a quick view from the States. But before we start, I'll tell you that you heard I'm a former state commissioner, current lecturer. I'm a scientist. I actually like experiments. I am a lawyer, which sometimes that gets booze, but I do like laws and policy. But I'm also a dad. I like my kids. I hope they're not embarrassed by me, and I hope to actually not disappoint them in the things that I'm doing. So for the next 6 minutes, I'm going to talk about these 4 things. The case for action, which I'll go quickly because you would not be here if you didn't know the case for action. The case for states, one of our few remaining functioning forms of government in this country. And a sampling of the leading states who are decarbonizing, and talk about how it is time to actually scale up the policies and programs that have actually been implemented in the states. And I was a commissioner. I was in the executive branch, the get stuff done branch of government instead of the legislative branch, which for those I see you over there, Ed. So for this audience, you all know the 1.5 degree report that dropped about a year ago in 2018, and then the 4th National Climate Assessment that was dropped a month later on Black Friday intentionally to try to bury it. So these 1,000+ page scientific reports normally do get buried. They normally end up on a shelf, except for now. And now is actually different. I think we are living in a different world, and I think John Schenk's sort of great keynote from yesterday morning sort of highlighted that the power of visuals, the power of images like this have now become part of our consciousness in a different way. They are above the fold in the newspapers. They're actually on the nightly news. And for everyone who is younger than I am, they're also in your Instagram, your Facebook, and your Twitter feeds as well. So we're in a different place where these things now are resonating, and the impacts are much closer to home. So this is about a dozen houses away from where I lived in grad school, over on Cozy Beach in East Haven, only 5 miles away from here. And I'm sure everyone in this audience now has the Kevin Bacon less than 6 degrees of separation from someone who is experiencing extreme climate-induced disruption to their lives. And they can be as small as literally here on Connecticut's coast, there are now roads that flood twice a month just at high tide, and that's happening here in Connecticut, Miami, across the country. So this is a different time, and where there is now a more personal connection. So that's the bummer side of my, my slideshow. Now we're going to talk about things that are actually working, and there are glimmers of hope of where things are working. States are a microcosm, and for the scientists who like to experiment, that's a good thing. But they're also a microcosm at a significant enough scale that they actually matter. They're actually relevant when you're talking about California scale and New York scale or the coalition of states. They start adding up to something real and meaningful, particularly when California is the 6th largest economy in the world. Connecticut often likes to say, and together we're the 5th. When you add New York and a few other places, Connecticut loves to fight with bigger states and get joined to them. They are generally, and I'm really generalizing here, they're not as hyper-partisan, at least relative to Washington. And this actually makes a difference at the state. You will all have your example of a state that doesn't follow this, but in general, there are places where your representative leaders are also a lot closer to the people that they represent, which is also a benefit of working at the state level. And they've run the experiments. So as a scientist and a lawyer, one of my favorite Supreme Court quotes of all time is from Justice Brandeis, who coined that phrase in an original New Deal sort of opinion. The phrase that states are the laboratory of democracy. And I'm going to go quickly through a few examples, and happy to talk about in the discussion of where states have run the experiments on what economy-wide deep decarbonization policy would look like. And it would look a lot like this photo, which is now one of my favorites, which is the blowing up of the last coal-fired power plant in Massachusetts at Brayton Point to make room for a new offshore wind hub and the interconnection of the offshore wind in New England back to the grid. So that's part of what states are doing. 22 states in the District of Columbia have some form of economy-wide greenhouse gas target on their books that guide all state action. The federal government could do the same. They could follow the IPCC recommendation of 50% reduction by 2030 and rewrite the Clean Air Act, the FERC governing statutes. And one of my favorites is NEPA, that 50-year-old original environmental law that could be transformed into a national climate policy act and actually make every decision in the federal government recognize its impact positive or negatively on the climate. States have set standards for what comes out of our sockets, the renewable portfolio standards. 29 states in the District of Columbia, 55% of the retail electric sales have some recognition of the need to move to renewables. Not all of them are as ambitious as they need to be, but an ambitious one would have a phase out of coal by 2030, 80% carbon free by 2030 nationwide, which is twice what we currently do, and 100% carbon free by 2045 as a country. States are actually also picking winners, and I know I get in debates with Dan Esty over this one about states not being good at picking winners, but we've picked winners in the very highest level by saying we want to get out of carbon and we want to get into zero carbon. And states are able to do that. So they can say no thank you to internal combustion engines, and that's what California has done through their ZEV mandate. It simply says to the auto manufacturers, build electric vehicles and sell them on a time scale. Now, simple and the California ZEV mandate almost never go together because it is not that simple, and it's mostly because the manufacturers were afraid, as they always are. They always have the Chicken Little sort of attitude that they'll never be able to get it done, so they put a bunch of flexibility mechanisms in as a safety net. None of their, like seat belts, like catalytic converters, like electric vehicles, none of those darkest fears of the auto companies came true, and now we actually have real, quantifiable, actual numbers of electric vehicles on the road. And 9 states, Colorado and Minnesota and New Mexico, as 3 additional states, want in, that's almost 40% of the auto market, want to be in the world of selling more zero-emission vehicles. The last 2, New Mexico and Minnesota, said yes, even after the Trump administration went after the California mandate, the California waiver. So these are states that are willing to sign up even in the face of federal government moving backwards. They're not aggressive enough. They're on track to have about 20-25% of vehicle sales electric by 2030. That needs to be doubled if we're actually going to be serious about where the IPCC says we want to go. The federal government spends a lot. We know that. They could spend better. One small example would be to get out of the business of subsidizing diesel transit buses. We have 65,000 of them on our roads. You could actually transition all of them to Made in America electric buses, which states are already doing with their VW settlement dollars. They're buying electric buses that get you a double win on both climate and local air pollution. The cost is real. It's $40 billion over 10 years. It was my back of the envelope calculation. That would turn that 65,000 diesel buses into all electric within 10 years. We need public and private investment here in charging infrastructure, the smart grid of the future. Public utilities are going to be playing a new and somewhat uncomfortable role for them as both the operator of this distributed grid and our new transportation fuel source and your home heating and cooling source as we electrify everything in this decarbonized world. States are putting prices on carbon, and you can think about RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative here in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. It's not high enough, so states supplement with policy, with active participation in procurement of clean energy by using competitive procurements to drive down prices. So states recognize that it isn't market mechanisms or command and control regulations. It's actually both, and they can be complementary. And that's another lesson of the states. States have also figured out that this new world has to be for everyone and not for the ones who are already advantaged. And this is a place where Connecticut has been, we're proud to have leadership there. And I see my colleague who was the former chair of the Green Bank in the audience, where they saw that our solar incentives here in Connecticut were going to Westport and West Hartford and not Waterbury and Bridgeport. And they said that's not how we want to actually make sure we're delivering clean energy for all. So they actually started a new program at the Green Bank, Solar for All, partnered with Posigen, a company that was willing to provide financing in a credit-challenged space, and now have achieved solar deployment parity in Connecticut. So half of our solar installations go to area census tracts above area median income, and half go to below area median income, with dramatic increases in deployment in our most distressed communities and areas. Utilities and utility regulators have to play a role there as well, ensuring that our infrastructure for electric vehicles doesn't only go to the places, again, the Westports and the West Hartfords, and are not addressing the challenges of clean transportation in multifamily housing in urban areas as well. So I got the sign that I need to wrap up my portion, but the last two pitches are that it is time to go national. States have taken the ball pretty far down the field by proving out that sort of what policies can work. Now you need actually the federal government to get into that deep decarbonization business. And that federal government, like Connecticut, California maybe could do it, but Connecticut is not going to do the massive investment in the research and development, the development of these new sort of next generation renewables, dealing with negative emissions, thinking about carbon sequestration. You need significant investment, over $1 trillion over the next 10 years. But put that in perspective, we spend $600 to $700 billion a year on the military. The Trump tax cut cost us about $1.5 billion, $1.5 trillion over 10 years. This investment will create more investment if it's done through things like green banks. It will also help avoid our costs of inaction, which we see impacting us all the time. It is that national approach that's also necessary to manage that transition, which is going to be a challenge in our resource-extractive states, the states that rely currently on fossil fuels as a major part of their economy. So hopefully I've begun to make the case for states as our true laboratories of democracy, the importance of having targets and mandates and increased capital flows, and that innovative policy can actually be a force for good. It can create and move markets, and that large institutions, including cities, Yale, corporations, can push policymakers, the utilities, utility regulators, and again, create a demand for decarbonization from the bottom up. There are now 25 states who are in the U.S. Climate Alliance. That's halfway. We need the other 25 to ensure we get that 50% reductions by 2030. Thank you.
So, so I'll start anyway. Okay, there you go. Perfect. Okay. So, as a practitioner in the private sector of the environmental enterprise, I'm going to talk about corporations and their role in the environmental enterprise. And as someone active in renewable energy, I'm going to use that as an example of my points. But first, I want to talk about the corporation, the animal of the corporation. What drives this animal of the corporation? Not like a government, not like other entities. It's a special type of entity. So they're profit-driven. Everybody has to remember that they need to deliver for their shareholders, and in order to do that, they have to compete. They need to survive and succeed, and therefore they push boundaries, but they also survive and succeed by being creative. So that's exactly what the environmental enterprise needs to do to get out of the private sector, the corporate environment, what the environmental enterprise needs from them. So what do? They do very valuable things. They actually implement ideas and activities. So they attract, mobilize, develop people, capital, and technology. They respond to incentives, both positive and negative, both economic and regulatory, so they can be an agent for the environmental enterprise. So what conditions are best to motivate them? Well, they need to know they can make a profit. And sometimes people in other sectors of the environmental enterprise resent that companies are making a profit, but that's what drives them to do what they do. They need clarity because they want to know what the rules are. Most of them follow the rules. Some of them want to know what the rules are so they can be right at the edge or maybe break them and not get caught, but most of them want to follow the rules. So they need clarity. And very importantly, stability, because they invest long term. So they want to know that the money they put in the ground today is going to pay them back according to the forecast they make over time. So that's really important, and that's where policy and the private sector come together, because sometimes people who make policies forget that they shouldn't be changing them again and again, because that turns the private sector off from making the investments. So let's take a minute to see what the private sector actually accomplished over time in renewable energy. So over the last 10 or so years, renewable energy in this country, unfortunately we're only talking about here because it's a global issue, but nonetheless this is what we can control and influence. We have to talk about the US only. Went from basically 0 to 12% of the energy mix, and it's a huge energy mix. And today, $50 billion a year is being spent on renewable energy. Most of this was done by the private sector. Utilities are private, they're regulated, but they're private. Private sector developers, investors, power purchasers, and most of the money that was spent on it is private sector money. Banks, insurance companies, equity funds, and corporations. And these private sector enterprises created a workforce. There were no wind or solar technicians in 2003 in this country. And they didn't bring them from Germany and the Netherlands. They were created, hopefully a lot of them were retrained from the sectors that are going down. So this shows kind of a mix of wind and solar over the last 10 years. The blue is wind, so early on a lot of wind projects, and then later on solar picked up. Importantly, today, in the last 3 years, 2/3 of all new generating capacity came from wind and solar. And I focus on them too. There are a lot of other sectors of renewable energy, but unfortunately they're much, much smaller. So wholesale wind and solar, supplemented some by residential, is where the bulk of the renewable energy comes from. So this kind of shows the evolution of the mix. You can see that coal is on the outs, which is good. That's where it belongs. And natural gas and renewable energy are pushing coal out or taking up the slack. Unfortunately, natural gas is picking up more of the slack than renewables. It's easier to implement and quicker to implement, but renewables are growing. Not fast enough, but they are growing. And the volume that I talked about is driving down costs. The costs for wind and solar have come down significantly since 2009, and the cost of battery storage, as we speak, is coming down precipitously. And so the volumes drove down the cost, which is the way it can work. So resulting in that renewable energy costs are actually now on par or cheaper than fossil fuels. The blue is wind, the two yellow and orange is solar. They are at par or even below the gray, which is gas-fired, which is the competitor for wind and solar. And you can see coal is very expensive. These are levelized costs without the subsidies. And some subsidies, the tax benefits are still in place. They're being phased out now, but the phase out is slow. So this shows better than, or it's better today with the subsidies even than this, but without the subsidies, they're still going to be cheaper. So what were the drivers? Rob mentioned the states. Absolutely right. The states have been the drivers. And 29 states have state laws that require a certain mix of renewable power. The fundamental concept of investor-owned utilities is the public utility commissions allow utilities to rate-base investments and also power purchased by contract. Both of those can be rate-based. So it goes into the rate base, and the utilities then can see a profit, and so they invest. And at the federal level, there have been these investment tax credits, production tax credits, which effectively, they don't increase demand, but they change the economics. They make it cheaper. They bring in cheaper capital. And there's been really good collaboration between public and private in making, in helping the private sector facilitate access toward the tax benefits. They've been very arcane and complex, and so the IRS lawyers and the private sector lawyers have collaborated in order that they be clear for the private sector to invest. That's been very, very important. Corporations have voluntarily begun to buy renewable energy, and over the last 5 years have bought 15 gigawatts of wind and solar. And the NGOs are important as well. SEIA, Solar Energy Industry Association, AWEA for wind, ACOR for renewable energy. They lobby, they provide information, they network. Networking was mentioned, very, very important to network, and they help train people. And universities as well. There's a long list. Obviously, I mentioned Yale, but NC State, for example, has been an incubator for solar for like 30 years, and really don't get recognized for it. So this is the map that I mentioned, that Rob mentioned, of the states which have renewable portfolio standards. Hawaii, California, New York have set a 100% target. These ratchet up over time. Unfortunately, we have some white spaces in there thanks to the southern companies, the utilities that are resisting renewable portfolio standards, but hopefully that'll change. And then here are all the corporations that have purchased this. Last year, 75 companies. You can't see it, I'm sorry for the small print, but these are household names. Facebook, Walmart, Microsoft, even Exxon bought renewable power directly from projects, not going through utilities. I mean, the power is delivered through the utilities, but the contract is directly with the projects. So how can we do better? We did a lot, but we need to do better. I agree completely that the federal government has to step in. It's too important to let the states do it, although the states are still pushing and are still driving. My overall concept, though, is that the federal government or anybody setting requirements, incentives, should let the private sector do it. Set the goals, create incentives, and let them do it, and let them make a profit doing it, because they're the ones who can mobilize the people and the technology and the capital. So we need a national RPS. We need a national transmission grade upgrade plan to support penetration of renewables. We need energy storage grid integration requirements which enable penetration. We bring back the Clean Power Plan, which drives states to reduce emissions. We need electric vehicles. That's a huge portion of the source of emissions. Electric vehicle production and charging station rollout. The EU is way ahead of us in doing this. Buildings also are a huge source of emissions. We need building efficiency requirements, and why not make it national? New York City is doing this right now. They have a very relatively short-term plan, 5 to 10 years, requiring buildings to reduce their energy usage and their emissions. And I think we need a cabinet-level Secretary of the Environment instead of having a Secretary of Fossil Fuels.
Oh, it is? Okay. So you don't need this one. Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you. So I'm Kerry Cesareo, and I'm a Senior Vice President at the World Wildlife Fund. And similar to my fellow speakers, I wanted to look back a little bit on kind of where the non-governmental organization or NGO sector has been as a bit of stage setting for how we envision the environmental enterprise going forward. NGOs have played a role over the years in seeing needs and forming, in some cases, to respond to very specific needs. So seeing gaps where things needed doing, where action needed to be taken, and coming into that space to sort of push or to help make things happen. So my own organization, the World Wildlife Fund, was founded in 1961. At the time, there were limited international organizations focusing on conservation. There were some, but one of the big gaps that the founders of WWF saw was inadequate resources to get that work done. So there was knowledge and expertise and a desire to save wildlife, and WWF was formed to help facilitate resources to those organizations on the ground. So at its outset, it was trying to support that other work. That kicked off, that was during a time when other organizations were forming as well. You had the Environmental Defense Fund, which was created in 1967. That was formed by a group of lawyers and scientists looking to ban DDT. You had NRDC formed in 1970 by another group of lawyers, including the former dean of the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, Gus Speth. They also were looking to use litigation as a tool. Greenpeace was founded in 1971 with a direct action model. And then World Resources Institute was founded in 1982, also Gus Speth involved in that. And that was recognizing a need for more rigorous policy research and analysis to feed into to address some of the big global issues we were seeing. Obviously, there are other groups as well. The Nature Conservancy, WCS preceded sort of that era. They each were formed with their own focus as well. So the Nature Conservancy focusing on land conservation, WCS looking to support, to support a zoo in its early days at least. Even though each of these organizations had a DNA at its outset, they evolved over time, right? In response to sort of recognizing those needs and just the sheer complexity of the problems that the organizations were aiming to solve. And so WWF very quickly went from being an organization that was looking to facilitate funding to being an implementer as well. And its initial focus on wildlife expanded to the habitats needed to support that wildlife. And then in the 80s realized, there was a program called Wildlands and Human Needs that was looking at the intersection of human development and conservation. Fast forward into the 90s where, and this is a time kind of towards the end where I joined WWF, a focus on market transformation. So this recognition, we had been working on policy and science and conservation, but a need to engage business in the problem solving that we were facing in terms of conservation. So at the time when I joined WWF was at the emergence of voluntary certification systems or eco-labels, and many programs were launched during that time. The Forest Stewardship Council, Marine Stewardship Council, Climate Savers, programs like that. Today, WWF focuses on forests, the program I lead, oceans, wildlife, freshwater, climate, food, probably forgetting one, wildlife, still do wildlife. And we work in a number of ways to achieve goals around those themes. I think the trend I'm seeing now is an ever-increasing recognition and a focus on people being at the center of those efforts, both as sort of how we do conservation, but why we do conservation, and I see that being a theme going forward as well. So you had this trend where and other NGOs similarly have evolved and diversified how they are approaching conservation. In that diversification, there's also been a loss of distinctiveness by each of these organizations. So everyone has a corporate engagement program. Most of these organizations are working on policy, trying to respond to the complexity of solving these problems and to some of the signals in the world about how to get things done. There's been a trend over the past 20 years where sort of a recognition that perhaps business has some of the solutions or is more effective perhaps than some of our government institutions in getting things done, or at least that has been some of a pervasive wisdom that I think has filtered into our design of solutions. And there's a survey that Edelman does on trust that looks at trust in different institutions, and consistently over the years, NGOs and business have had higher trust among people than government institutions. And I just looked up the most recent iteration of this, and trust in governments and the media, in mainstream media, were very low, whereas consistently and rising was trust in NGOs and businesses. So as Derry said, this sort of, I've kind of traveled along this path where when I came to Yale, I owe a debt to, he's been mentioned several times today, so I just want to say I owe a debt to Brad Gentry, who team taught a course on partnerships and conservation. And one of the things we looked at was a joint venture between First Nations, and it involved environmentalists and a forestry company. And I was very inspired by this. It was at the time when really sort of a surge around market-based interventions to conservation, and it really ended up kind of setting my course. I came to WWF, and as I said, we were working on things like certification, very focused on that. I was involved in something called the Global Forest and Trade Network, which sought to take this concept of certification and operationalize it as a way to save the world's forests. So coming out of the Rio Summit in '92, where there had been a failure to achieve agreement on forests, you had kind of a multi-stakeholder effort to devise new solutions to get after the problem of deforestation. And there are many indications that we've been successful in that effort, right? So you had implementation, sort of the rise of the Forest Stewardship Council and other certifications. Today, nearly 500 million acres around the world are certified to this FSC standard. We've had hundreds of companies commit to responsible sourcing and set targets. You can go into stores, and things that show up in your mailbox have the FSC logo. And so by some measures, we've been successful. However, at the same time, we're seeing all the trends go in the wrong direction. So I think there's just this grappling with a pretty basic idea that none of these things are the silver bullet, and that there's limitations to voluntary mechanisms on their own. So looking ahead, I wanted to frame kind of three ideas that have really been on my mind and among, I think, colleagues and others working in this space that sort of recognize those limitations and sort of perhaps ways in which NGOs are trying to innovate and address how we move forward, have this more effective environmental enterprise. The first is, the concept of targets. I mean, we certainly need to move into implementation, but it is no small thing to have the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which put environmental considerations on par with development. So the previous iteration of these goals, the Millennium Challenge goals under Millennium Development Goals, did not include those environmental considerations. So now we have recognition and agreement at the highest level that puts sort of those goals next to one another. And we do see that guiding policymaking and changes around the globe in certain countries, and starting to see the flow down of those goals to other sectors. And so I think that is it's important to recognize that. I think there are some weak places in the intersections of those goals, so they do all sort of stand alone in their little box to some extent. It's quite possible to perhaps reach the infrastructure goal while completely undermining the climate and land and water goals. The other concept, I think, is one of systems acupuncture. So this idea of focusing on some critical leverage points. One of those leverage points, I think, that I'm personally really interested in working on, and we're working on, is the intersections of nature and public health. So it's possible that there's going to be some places where investing in, say, prevention of land degradation could have a disproportionate benefit on reducing the emergence of infectious disease. So how do we get after that? And the final point is this idea of integrating and aligning efforts across sectors. So I think the space that we're in now, having devoted quite a lot to work on the ground in places around the world, and then engaging at the levels of engaging on, say, market transformation, is how do we bring those things together more effectively? And one example of that is last fall, we announced, there was an announcement by Walmart and Unilever and some partners in Malaysia about how to drive not just the demand for commodities that weren't contributing to deforestation, but how to support local efforts on the ground to actually get that done, and commitments by the suppliers to Walmart to do that as part of Walmart's Project Gigaton. So I'm running out of time there. I thought not having slides I would use less time, but lots to say about this. And maybe one final exhortation for all of us is that as we envision the future of the environmental enterprise, it not only needs to involve these other sectors such as health or drive that integration, but I think it needs to look quite different and more diverse in terms of its leadership, in terms of how we design and execute on solutions, because what got us here is not going to get us there. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to take a few minutes, and I say a few minutes so that we can leave the balance for opening it up for questions. But I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about the role of volunteers and also the role of entrepreneurs and startups in this space. I think everyone has done a wonderful job of outlining all the different parts of the enterprises, and where I work in this space is really with entrepreneurs and social enterprises, including nonprofits. So after I graduated here at the School of Forestry in 2013, in 2015 I founded my company, Velvet Frame. So I work with nonprofits and social enterprises on a range of capacity building challenges, mainly in the areas of strategic communications, leadership development, and organizational design. So my approach is really, sincerely, an ecosystems approach. And I think that environmentalists and those of us who are trained and work in this space have an incredible framework and a mindset that we bring to this work, which is frankly undervalued. It's not something that people who come out of other schools or other training spaces have to do to prove the value, but I think we're often in a position where what we have to contribute is not just about the technical skill or the scientific knowledge, but it really is about the ability to hold potentially competing thoughts and ideas and courses of action in tension, and to try to come up with messy, multidisciplinary, intersectional solutions. So what I try to do within the concept of an ecosystems model is to help organizations think about how and where to locate themselves in the ecosystem and where and how they can be competitive. So I work with nonprofits and social enterprises. Your relationship to Uncle Sam does not mean anything to me as long as you are somewhere along the environment and social impact spectrum. So as a result, I get to work within the environment and sustainability space, but also adjacent to it and sometimes not even in that space. So what I really like about that is that it gives me the opportunity to have a really broad perspective, not only of how other sectors and industries view environmental issues and the work that we're doing in this space, but also because it gives me the vantage point of understanding how we can work together. Like, where are the areas of synergy? Where is the language or the narrative that we can export from our space and help people to really embed kind of environmental or ecosystems ethos within their work? So this idea of locating yourself in a system for a nonprofit, it might be how their theory of change makes progress on a particular social issue. But when we're talking specifically about the environmental enterprise, the challenge that I really see that a lot of entrepreneurs and social enterprises are trying to solve is how to exist in multiple places on that ecosystem and within that enterprise. So you might be working for a for-profit company that has a very strong social or environmental mission, but you're still for profit. So when we're in this space where we're talking, as has come up over the last day, we're trying to take away the silos. We're trying to integrate. We're trying to have a deeper understanding of collaboration, not just coordination or cooperation, but true collaboration. It gets a little bit tricky to know who is really existing where. As nonprofits are thinking about how to evolve their models, particularly smaller ones that are struggling to be financially self-sustaining and to try to step away from a typical pray and spray grant application model, thinking about how they can have a for-profit or social enterprise built in partnership with the nonprofit, and then for-profits are thinking about how they can be more socially responsible. So how do we negotiate this bigger space, this map of different organizations blending together or kind of moving in and out of each other's lanes? And I think that that's partly where the answer about volunteerism comes in. As I mentioned before, with the work with Yes, this has really been an alumni-driven effort, and that is really anchored in volunteerism. And when we talk about environmental organizations, there's always a group of volunteers who are supporting and kind of running that back end of the system, whether you are volunteering for a land trust, or you are working to clear trails in the wild spaces near your community. The whole idea is that volunteerism in a lot of ways can pick up and fill the gap between the professional work that you are paid to do on a day-to-day basis and the work that you would like to do. So it can be that transition point into a new career. It can be a way of thinking about how to incorporate an environmental focus within your work and hopefully to push the existing organization that you're working with into a more sustainable direction. So the other piece that I just want to mention briefly is that social entrepreneurship and the sort of innovation space is what's hot now. I mean, you can't go to a conference or listen to a conversation about these things without someone talking about innovation or the question of how we innovate. And one of my favorite quotes by one of the most famous alums of this school is by Aldo Leopold. And he says, the first rule of intelligent tinkering is to save all the pieces. And I think one of the one of the challenges when you're talking about a big enterprise like this is that there are so many pieces, and those pieces come in the form of potential solutions, political considerations, ideas that have been tried before and maybe failed, but the time is now right, lack of funding, but not lack of vision. So there are all these different pieces that we're all trying to grapple with. And I think the other place where volunteerism and this bigger question of innovation and entrepreneurship fit together is this sense of speed and experimentation. There are things that you can do as a volunteer that maybe you've been trying to push and do for years within your day job that because you have a community of like-minded people, you're not making the case when you come to a Yale alumni event or a volunteer event about how and why these issues are important. So that the kind of appetite for speed and experimentation is also, I think, what connects us with students. And as we think about what how do we make the rest of our time here today really valuable, and how do we think about what happens next? How do we keep that curve of action going? I think one of the answers, and I hope what we can discuss when we transition into questions, is the way in which the environmental enterprise is a living, breathing enterprise, that it's something that we're all personally invested in from a planetary health standpoint, but it's also something that we're constantly creating and recreating, which I think is a perfect blend or reflection of what nature is. So looking forward to the question and answer period. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you to Lauren, and thank you to all the members of this panel. We've got about 15 minutes, 14 by that clock up there, in order to have a discussion. I had prepared a couple questions for the group, but given that we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to just save those for the very unlikely situation where the conversation might get slow. But that said, is there anything that people on the panel first want to comment or question other members of the panel about what they've said?
No, I saw a bunch of hands already up there.
I see hands going up. And do we have a microphone that's going to go around? Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to give to you the power to just roam around the room and pick somebody. And you've got somebody about 5 feet away from you. We'll start there, and we'll just kind of move, if we can, we'll just move across like that, and you pick them as we go. So, sir.
Hi, thanks for the panel. My question is for perhaps Rob and Tom. You did a really good job outlining the mandates, for example, RPS standards. To me, the biggest inhibitor of that is not the financing or the standards, but the actual interconnection into the utilities. Even for a rooftop system, you could be 3 to 6 months or longer. For utility scale, 2 to 5 years or longer. So, I mean, if we want to hit RPS standards, we need to do something about standardizing interconnection. And I don't know if you've given that any thoughts, or how we could leverage the utility companies to actually accept the thousands of interconnection requests that are waiting.
Yeah, I'll start, but I'm happy to let you finish. That's part of the mindset of the utility regulatory structure in general needs a refresh. It too, the Federal Power Act is 1935. The original sort of, the mantra for utilities is about reliable, lowest cost. It doesn't say anything about the things that actually states are demanding of their utilities and utility regulators and the ISO systems and FERC to say, wait a minute, we want clean, and then figure out what the way to do it in the fastest, most effective. So I would actually include in that list of things that need a massive update, a change in the way that utilities and utility regulation works to have carbon reduction as priority one, and then figure it out. And states are pushing in that direction, but pushing up against these countervailing threats, and we run into very strange situations. And that beyond you are way down here at you want it to take less time to actually get the interconnection. But if your utility regulation structures, if your utilities were all in the decarbonization business, they would figure that out instead of just being purely in the reliability business.
Yeah, I'm not an engineer, but I've seen projects where a significant amount of the cost is interconnection, and that's built into the price. So you require a utility to meet certain levels, and they then have to pay enough so that it will support the transmission. I've seen projects where even a third of the cost, because they were way out in the desert and had to be connected into Los Angeles. And also the rate base concept will also support that. I mean, for example, if a utility decided to invest in a system overall that wouldn't have a use, the next day, wouldn't be specific to a particular near-term investment, that still would be able to go into the rate base as long as the PUC allowed it.
Now, we'll take one more from this section, then we'll go to the middle, and then, so pick one there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, panelists. Very, very good. This question might be for Tom, but anybody can chime in. Within the last 10 years, the corporate world kind of responded to this emergent idea of sustainability by embracing this idea of the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profits. To a lot of people's mind, it was a nice talking point, but in a lot of other people's minds, it didn't get past that. So, Tom, perhaps you can start by saying, what's real? What has become real in that? Where has the rubber hit the road on the triple bottom line, in your view, in the world of corporations?
I mean, I guess I would say I'm a combination of realistic and cynical. I mean, I showed a long list of companies who voluntarily purchased renewable energy, but they started in about 2014. They didn't start in 2003 when renewable energy was 5 times as expensive as fossil fuels. So, and also, I think a lot of them did it because it looks good. So I personally don't really expect corporations to do things which have purely, good of the planet results. I expect them to, I think they do it, they want to do it, but they still need to balance that and maybe even favor the bottom line, but they'll do it. Those companies did it when renewable energy wasn't much more expensive or was on par, and also when it was good for their image, which is good for business for them.
Maybe if I can just add on to that. I mean, I think one of the things we're seeing is that there are companies that are starting to look out over a longer time frame on this and considering risk from climate change and other things. I mean, I think the case of PG&E is a cautionary tale, right? So I think one of the challenges we have right now is the third P, is it profit? Is it prosperity, and prosperity for who? I think we used to talk, sustainability at one point was defined by the 3 E's, which were equity, equity was in there, economics, and environment. And right now, the 3 P's, you could view it as planet being systems level, people being systems level, profit being enterprise level, and that's not putting things on par. So I think the world we need to be moving into and supporting is one where we're looking at healthy economies, not just healthy individual businesses, because the reality is not every business is actually going to be able to thrive into the future given changing climate and just changing conditions. And so I think getting back to some of that, and I think some business leaders are coming out and speaking out about that. Now, I think there's still a lot of tension between how that relates to quarterly earnings statements and sort of pressures, but I think we have to look forward in terms of what that needs to look like from a healthy economy standpoint.
And I just pick up on a point that Kerry was making about long-term outlook of businesses. Several years ago, Walmart became a strong supporter of sustainable fishing. Through their grocery department, they have been the biggest retail sellers of fish. They realize that if they want to remain in the fish business, that as big as they are, they have to support sustainable fishing in order to still be in that business at all. So we're going to pick somebody in the middle section here, and just decide, somebody.
So I work for the U.S. Department of Transportation, and so I was interested in hearing about your suggestion that we stop buying diesel buses. There's a program that's aimed at that. We also have a project right now trying to figure out what all the problems are with people trying to figure out how to do that. Mm-hmm. And it's not actually just confined to electric vehicles. It's also related to other advanced technologies that on the ground, the implementation issues are substantial in terms of people knowing what to do. And I was wondering if you had any comments on either what you've seen about how you build capacity for people to understand the engineering, the procurement issues, the operating and maintenance that they need to get their heads around, all of those differences, if there have been any experiments that have worked.
It's a great question, and you're referencing there is the major sort of buying of diesel buses, which I think is $600 million a year, and my number will be a little off, and $60 million goes to no and low emissions buses. So only 10% of our spend is on things that are actually supportive of decarbonization. So the experiments are being run. These buses are on the streets now. They're in Rhode Island. There's some coming to Bridgeport soon. So they are learning, and they are learning the challenges of interconnection. They're learning the challenges of making sure they work in a New England cold weather climate. They're learning about hills. San Francisco is really hilly, and you have to have different bus routes if you want to get up to the top of the hill, and which is a challenge of technology, and will be a challenge of how you deploy over the course of 10 years. But there's plenty of low-hanging, usable routes in relatively flat areas through often neighborhoods that are suffering from asthma and increased air pollution and other sorts of things. So to me, at a minimum, you flip the why are we spending 90% of money on diesel instead of only 10%, but then you have to expand it considerably. The experiments are, I think the data is coming in, and when you figure out the right routes, the charging times, the types of beefy electric infrastructure, those are all eminently solvable problems. And what it needs, though, is leadership and direction at the highest levels of government, which you see in the states and you frankly don't at the federal level.
Thank you. Okay, you've got the mic there.
Possession is 9/10 of the law.
Yeah.
I work in the education and youth engagement area, and so I keep thinking about every time there's been a major social crisis, the schools have stepped up and really helped to educate the public. And I'm wondering if there's consideration being given to alliances among for-profit, nonprofit, volunteer, community-based organizations to change the way we teach and learn so that schools and universities, but especially K-12 public schools, become idea factories to innovate complex solutions across disciplines and sectors. And the kids haven't been taught to think inside the box yet, so.
Who would like to?
Is there, maybe you're already working.
I think I'm supposed to take a crack at that. The public school system in the United States. So the first thing that comes to mind is something that I've been talking more and more about as the YBG Sustainability Initiative develops, this idea that we don't know what kinds of education, training, and degrees we're going to need in the next 10 to 20 years. And that's not even, that's at the collegiate level. That's not even, I think, what you're talking about, which is like grade school. The question of how do we think about the emerging trends and how does that intersect with environment? And part of the challenge is that we don't know what we don't know. So how do we imagine what type of people we're going to need in this broader enterprise and then reverse engineer that process? I'm not an education expert, so I'm sure there are probably people here that know more about this than I do, but the big challenge that I see from nonprofits that I've worked with that are in or around the education sector in the United States is different state-based regulations around what literally can and cannot be taught. And a lot of that conversation gets stuck in the area of science. And if we can't create a basic scientific knowledge base and foundations for students, how do you train, the next Brad Gentrys? Like, how do you even begin to think about what the technical knowledge is going to be in the future? So I think addressing that challenge and continuing to have conversations that frame the depoliticization of climate issues and the broader space of sustainability is going to be one place. The second place that I'm seeing promise, and part of my work does trend internationally. When I was here as a student, part of my research was on the intersection of climate change and the spread of infectious disease. And thanks to funding from the School of Public Health, I was able to work in Kenya with the Red Cross. And it's amazing to me how countries outside of the United States, developing countries, when I talk to students about this this social impact game that I was working on, and how gaming can be used for teaching and learning, and be very accessible regardless of literacy level, age, technical background, all those things. The extent to which all of those students, whether they were young ones that I was with or the colleges that I went to, the extent to which they get it about climate issues. And having a conversation with, you know, an 8-year-old kid in rural Kenya about, you know, can you explain global warming to me? And finding ways to communicate, not because there's any barrier to communication, but because there's such an appetite for it. So I think there are examples of, and we're, you know, happy to talk offline about this, but I think there are examples of other countries that are doing, frankly, a much better job engaging younger folks and helping them to have agency, really building agency. I think we're starting to see some of that with the increase in climate activism, the walkouts, like younger generations really taking the mantle in that regard. But there are lessons to be learned from outside the United States, I think.
The only
Our kindergartners will be 85 in 2100.
The only little add is that you're right, they're in state statute. I don't know if folks know in Connecticut that you're actually supposed to learn about the Irish potato famine. It's like there's a statute that says, like, yeah, I know, that has a list of things that's supposed to be in our curriculum. Recently, Connecticut added climate change into that list to ensure that it is part of what we're at least teaching in this one state, and there are other states. So that is.
Make the conversation not so much about content as about skill sets.
True.
Let's take a question over on this side. Yeah, thank you.
I'll take a shot at that. It's such a stark comparison. You have France, which is something like 85% nuclear, and next door you have Germany, which is shutting them all down. So, you know, and they both have the same technology and research to look at. So, you know, how can you have two stark, different approaches to nuclear? And I was talking to a French friend about that the other day, and apparently in the 70s, during the crisis of fossil fuels, somebody in the government said, we don't have any fossil fuels, we better figure out a way to be energy independent. So they started a program and built it up to what it is today, and there's no going back for them, and they're actually quite clean. And again, my view, well, I guess there's in a way a certain plus for nuclear, which you're alluding to, which is, although it may or may not be considered renewable, it is emissionless. So, and that's what's important right now. We want to cut down the emissions. On the other hand, in this country, it takes 10 years. You know, you're lucky if you can permit it in 5 years, and there are visceral reactions against it because of the accidents you mentioned, and so it's hard to permit one of those projects, and then it takes another 5 years or 10 years to build, and it's wildly expensive as well. It's a central plant. It goes against the distributed generation. So I personally wish that the federal government or utilities would actually maintain nuclear as part of their programs, but I just don't see it.
Now, there's a gentleman here who has the microphone. I'm going to ask if you can ask a very quick question. We'll try to do a quick answer because we've run over a little bit more than we were supposed to run over. And so, sir, you have the microphone. No, but you don't have the mic. I see you with the microphone, right? Yeah.
Okay. No, this is not a quick question, but I just say we all failed in our recycling behavior in this room. We are the most environmentally conscious people in the country, but if our professors grade our recycling behavior, we are F, because we all threw trashes into recyclables, and we threw recyclables into trashes. We're not alone. I've been observing this in the past 5 years on every single meeting that I go. Most of them are environmental meetings, environmental people. We all do the same thing. So please do not be embarrassed, but we need to learn how to recycle correctly. And we need to learn from the workers. We need to learn from the guys who drive the trucks. And we need to learn from our kids. Please do so. If we take away in this meeting to change our behavior on recycling, we achieved a lot. Thank you.
That's true. That's true. Well, I would just like to thank people here for an excellent discussion. Think of Aldo Leopold and all the pieces, but also think about how the pieces should work together and how we can make them into a better system. Carry that forward into the discussions that follow here at YES and into what you do when you leave this meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Lauren to give us instruction on next steps, but thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to just give a very quick preview of what to expect for the remainder of this conference. So in about, I'll say 6 or 7 minutes by the time I finish talking, at 11:30, we're going to go into our last block of concurrent sessions. So you can have your app, or you can check the sign right outside the door. There are 4 sessions. One workshop on decarbonizing electricity production, another workshop on using regenerative agriculture to decarbonize, one on Earth Day at 50th anniversary of Earth Day is next April, if you didn't know, and another on how smart city technology can be used to support sustainability goals. So we'll run that block of sessions from 11:30 to 12:30, and then at 12:30, please come back here to this area, grab lunch, and then take it to one of 2 brainstorming action sessions. One, which is the part 2 to this panel, actually putting pen to paper and talking about what the environmental enterprise really could look like, and Derry will lead that session. And then the other option is a continuation from this morning's breakfast session on the YBG Sustainability Initiative. If you are interested in both and just dying to be a part of both, I would say pick one and just reach out to the organizers of the other one, and then we'll get you on the list and keep you informed. So then that'll run until about 1:45, the brainstorming session. And then when you're done, just come back out and go to the knob that's right on the opposite end of this building for our closing reception. So everybody got it? Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. I want to welcome all of you. This is Earth Day at 50. This April, on the 22nd, is the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day. Started 50 years ago. There was a gentleman by the name of John McConnell in 1969 at a UNESCO conference who suggested having something like Earth Day. Senator Gaylord Nelson in 1970 started Earth Day with the help of Pete McCluskey in the Senate, and hired a gentleman by the name of Dennis Hayes, who was from a school that shall not be mentioned. But he hired 85 people, organized the first Earth Day, which they all said was conveniently selected as between spring break and final exams because of the target for colleges throughout the country. 20 million people showed up and celebrated, protested, wanted to make sure that people were more aware of what was challenging to the Earth. Earth Day didn't come about in a vacuum. Through the 60s, we had a huge oil spill in Santa Barbara. I grew up in Cleveland, and the Cuyahoga River burned. The Apollo moon landing and those photographs some of us saw yesterday in the presentation was the first time that we had really looked at our Earth and understood the fragility of our entire planet. With transportation and travel, we have become a smaller planet. People are sharing a lot more experiences. And it was from that that Earth Day has grown. It's now 192 countries. We've got about 1 billion people that celebrate Earth Day. And our experiences and what Earth Day brought has led to many different organizations essentially being born out of that event. Just a couple of examples. Greenpeace started in 1971 after Earth Day. The Forestry and Environmental Studies School started in 1972. It became the Environmental Studies School. The Natural Resources Defense Fund started in 1970 after Earth Day, and World Watch Institute in 1974, just as a few examples. But it led to hundreds of organizations and effort all over the world. And really changed how we look at our planet and what we do. I brought together these 4 people that are going to talk about their experiences with Earth Day and look going forward. But one thing I also want to mention is that none of us would probably be here if it wasn't for Earth Day. We are all children of Earth Day and that experience. And with that, it's a celebration, and it's also a look forward, because we certainly know what kind of challenges that we have. So with that, I want to start with Rory, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Rory Verato. I'm a PhD student in the Philosophy and Education program at Teachers College, Columbia University. I have prior degrees in American history and political theory from Arizona State University. I grew up in rural western Pennsylvania, basically in the woods. And so that, for me, is my grounding in nature. And we'll talk more about that, I think, later. But I'm also, in addition to my academic work at Teachers College, I'm a founding member of the New York City chapter of Extinction Rebellion. If you're not familiar with Extinction Rebellion, it's a global, decentralized, grassroots movement of ordinary people around the world, started in the UK, and it's seeking to sort of provoke transformational change, political change, in order to address, in a proportionate response, the climate and ecological crises that we face. So that's where I'm sort of positioned. Is that enough, or you want to?
Yeah, no, that's great. Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Gracer. I'm a lawyer, environmental lawyer, and a partner at the first environmental law firm in the United States, Sive Paget and Rizal, which was founded in 1962. So well before Earth Day. And I focus my practice increasingly on responses to climate change, keying off New York City's recent effort to cap greenhouse gas emissions from buildings, as well as New York State's recent groundbreaking climate change law. And I started as an activist. I was at the ACLU early in my career, and now I sort of consider myself a private sector activist. And there's a lot of energy in the private sector around addressing climate change, which I think is a good complement to the people who are in the streets pushing that change. So I'll be talking about some of those efforts. And I'm the chair of the New York City Climate Action Alliance, which is a very broad alliance of public and private sector and non-governmental organizations pushing climate action in New York City.
Sarah.
Hi, my name is Sarah Goddard, and I am from Rye, New York. It's a small city in Westchester County. It's got about 16,000 people, and it's a pretty traditional, wealthy community. And I got involved in sustainability probably about 12 years ago when I was asked to write a sustainability plan for our city. And I didn't realize how difficult and involved that was going to be. It certainly wasn't going to be an individual effort. And so I put together a committee. It was called the Rise Sustainability Committee. And we started working on and drafting the plan. But in the meantime, we also instituted a number of initiatives, one of which was a reusable bag campaign, which ultimately culminated in a plastic bag law in this very traditional city. And it was the first in Westchester County and the second in New York State. From there, I realized that that initiative was possible within such a traditional environment. And since then, I've been working on transforming cultures in communities that don't realize, or maybe perhaps don't want to be transformed, in order to move towards environmental change and sustainability. So that's sort of what I've been working on since then. And in the last 2 years, I ran for office, and I'm a member of the City Council now.
Thank you. Bob.
I'm Bob Purcell. I'm the director of the New England Forestry Foundation, which is a region-wide organization. We have 150 properties we call community forest, and we hold the easements on over 1 million acres of land. That's bigger than the state of Rhode Island, for comparison. We've been around, this is our 75th year that we're celebrating now. Personally, I grew up not too far from here on Long Island Sound, and I went to the forestry school here and set off on a forestry career. From that point on, I've worked for forest industry. I've had my own private forestry consulting business. I worked for many years for the Wilderness Society and helped protect wilderness areas around the country. And during that course, I served as the chair of the Northern Forest Alliance, which was trying to protect the northern part of New England. I also served the Wilderness Society as the land ethic director. So I think we have a lot to talk about here, and hopefully we'll get into how people connect to the land and do that. So that's always been part of my work on forest. I was a co-founder of the Forest Stewards Guild, which is a national professional organization that has a set of bylaws that state we have to practice the highest level of forestry. And now I work for, again, the New England Forestry Foundation. What we're working on now is what we think can have something that can have a major effect on climate change. We've done our analysis. We had an op-ed in the New York Times last month that says if we manage our forest in New England differently and we move some of that wood into buildings like this, instead of concrete and steel buildings, replace the concrete and steel, we could have a major climate mitigation effect with that, equivalent to at least taking every car in New England off the road for 20 years. It could be really, really big. And so that's exactly what we're working on right now.
We want to touch on that in this conversation. And I am Chip Spear. About 2 years ago, I started an organization called Earth Plus 30. This came about because I had been primarily a local activist involved in a lot of local politics, organizations, commissions. I have been a project manager. I'm somebody who looks at delivery, looks at goals, and tries to realize those things. After I moved from Connecticut, I lived not far away in Bethany for 28 years. I moved to Bronxville, not far from Sarah, and not too far from Jeff, and not too far from where Rory is now. I decided to take a slightly different tack. I asked myself that age-old question, well, if you had one thing you wanted to do before you died, what would it be, no matter how ridiculous it is? And I said, well, I'm somebody who thinks about goals and delivery. What is the vision and goal for our planet? 30 years from today, where are we going to be? Nobody has that vision. And I started podcasts talking to people about our future, what they think that vision should be, and asking them questions about our future so that we are thinking more holistically and across these different silos that we have referred to in numerous panels and discussions about how we're cross-pollinating and taking lessons learned from various areas, whether it be just the environment or climate and energy, but also we talk about architecture, agriculture, education, manufacturing, infrastructure, and the more social and political sides of things of privacy, security, education policies, immigration policies. We talked a little bit in one session I attended on migration and the impact of climate on migration, but there are other ways that we look at all those things. Political systems. I even had a podcast with a gentleman where we talked about biology and specifically how humans are attracted to evil and what impact that has on our political and social systems, and how do we mitigate for that when we're planning for the future, and how we're constructing our plans if we take things like that into account. And people certainly have different perspectives or subjective about what is evil. I would suggest that our current government is not particularly good, just my own feeling. But those are things we have to plan for if we're going to be more effective. We have to be realistic, and we have to take all those things into account. So that's what I do, that's what I'm doing. But specifically, none of this would have come about without Earth Day, and I think my own consciousness has certainly been raised by that. And the first question I want to ask our panelists is how they are impacted by Earth Day today. And we'll talk about today, we'll talk about yesterday, and we're going to talk a little bit about the future, and we'll get your input, and we'll have a little conversation. Considering the size, I think it can be a kind of cozy conversation. If we had some wine and beer and it was about 5 hours later, we'd, turn it into something. So, Rory.
Sure. So the question is about Earth Day and what it means to us now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about this because we had our prior discussion, and where is the origin of my consciousness about this type of stuff? And I was thinking back into my childhood. I was born 18 years after the first Earth Day, I think. And so my first exposure that I can recall to this type of awareness comes through something maybe perhaps trite, but influential to me, which was a cartoon, Captain Planet. Does anybody remember this?
Yeah.
So Captain Planet influenced me, and there's a host of other, works from media, literature, et cetera, that have influenced me. But in terms of what Earth Day means to me now, before I came to New York a couple years ago, I was teaching high school in Scottsdale, Arizona, and each year I would hold a discussion with my students on Earth Day, about Earth Day and what it means. So I taught a philosophical seminar, and I would display the pale blue dot image, from Voyager 1, and just have a discussion about the human condition, human's place in the universe, and sort of our relationship to the planet itself. And I love this quote from Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, NASA astronaut, who described what he came to call the overview effect, which was the transformation of consciousness that you experienced, or that he experienced when he looked back on the Earth from space, from the moon. And the quote, which I can't remember in its completeness, is something to the effect of, he wants to drag all the politicians up there by the neck and say, look, you son of a bitch, this is what the Earth is, this is what we're fighting for, et cetera. But so that for me is what Earth Day is a reflection of, this planetary consciousness, the potential for a planetary consciousness at least, which in academic philosophy is associated oftentimes with something called cosmopolitanism, which the Greek roots of that word means citizen of the universe, basically. Citizen of the world, cosmos, polites. So for me, again, that's what that represents. Earth Day represents, it's an aspirational goal towards human unity as a species. And of course, It's banal to say that every day should be Earth Day, but it's true. We have to, at least Extinction Rebellion's understanding of our current predicament necessitates this type of transformation of consciousness that would be post-national, post-capitalist, et cetera, fundamental transformation of consciousness rooted around this deep recognition of unity, not only between humans around the world, but humans in nature, et cetera.
Great. Jeff?
So I was here, I was on this planet on Earth Day, and my memories are not vivid of Earth Day itself, but my memories of the moon landing are very vivid, and of that image that the astronauts took and sent back, which really, I remember that image being on the cover of the Whole Earth catalog, and that really was what created the modern environmental movement. Some people credit that image as much as Earth Day itself with a change in thinking, so I agree with your observations. You know, Earth Day for me, I have mixed feelings in the sense that it was an incredibly successful protest event. At 20 million people in 1970 was 10% of the population of the United States. So it was a very, very significant protest, and it really catalyzed action by predominantly lawyers who modeled themselves after Thurgood Marshall and other people at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to demand a set of laws and then to use those laws to really transform pollution in America. And I think to a certain extent where we are today is both a mark of the success of that effort in terms of the addressing traditional pollutants that you can see and smell and taste. But there's one set of pollutants that really sort of slipped through the cracks, and that's carbon emissions. And we're now, I think, in many ways back where we started in terms of Earth Day being something that's sort of a pale echo of what it really was at that time, and we need another Earth Day, and we need a new shock to the system to get federal action. I think we need a lot more than that. And then earlier today, we also heard about all of I think the difference and the advantage that we have now is that environmentalism is no longer just something that happens when people go to the streets. It's really deeply integrated into many, many state and local governments, even the federal government, notwithstanding the president, and also the private sector. And a number of, I'm a baby boomer, the CFOs and the CEOs really care about this.
Yeah.
The board members really care about this, not in every industry, but in many industries. So I think there are many more allies. We have many more allies today than we did on the first Earth Day, where really the Earth had no allies. But the problem is much bigger. And so it's going to require a much more significant effort, I think, than it took to get the cavalcade of environmental laws that sort of define the modern environmental movement.
Sarah, today.
Yes, so I was alive during Earth Day, but I was young, and I must confess that I don't remember it. So when I was asked to think about this question, I thought about it in the context of comparing how I view Earth Day today with what I understood Earth Day back in 1970. And I think we're looking at two different beasts. They look similar. It's Earth Day. It's still named Earth Day. But Earth Day in 1970 emanated from a different source. You had Gaylord Nelson, who was a Democratic senator, and he was the one who reached across the aisle to Pete McCloskey, a Republican, and then they enlisted a member of the educational establishment that we shall not name, Dennis Hayes, to organize this event. And what I found really interesting was that this event, the reason it's on April 22nd, and you may all know this, but I didn't know this, it was organized because it was during spring break. So it was somewhat of the parents kind of putting together an activity for the youth and for these activists to celebrate and ask for and demand action. So Gaylord Nelson was inspired by the anti-war movement, but it really was a different and more institutionalized event back in 1970. And because of that, you were able to see bipartisan action. You were able to witness the birth of the APA out of a Republican administration. And then we saw regulatory enactments, you know, clean water, clean air, and so forth. So today, when I think about Earth Day, I can't rely on that institution of the federal government. And what I have been doing for the last 10 to 15 years is working within my community at a grassroots local level. And I think what we've witnessed across the country and across the world are these pockets of groups and organizations that are working from the bottom up, which, yes, it does affect change, but at the same time, we need an institutional leader. And I have to say, and I'm probably going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, but I was talking with some of my fellow panelists here, and I said, yesterday when I went home, my family asked me, how did you find the event? And I said, I'm not sure, but there was something unsettling about it. And what I realized is that here is Yale. Yale is potentially the institutional leader. And yet, so much of what Yale could do with all its wealth and power is not getting done. They're not divesting from fossil fuels. And on a more sort of anecdotal, but really not anecdotal level, you know, you look at the spread of food out on the buffet there, and it's plastic cups, it's plastic stirrers, it's plastic bottles, water bottles, and to a certain extent, it can be seen as, oh, well, that's just frivolous, but it's not, because Yale has the capacity to push forward systemic and structural change. And those of us who are boots on the ground trying to do the best that we can at the grassroots level, we need that institutionalized leader. And so that's why I was a little bit unsettled yesterday, and that's sort of what I wanted to talk about today. But I see Earth Day, to get back to it, I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but I see Earth Day as a way for us grassroots organizations to find our institutional leaders and to say, you guys need to make real, substantive, compelling, and sustainable change.
Bob, Sarah, thank you very much for that, by the way. It's very, very important.
Wow.
Sorry.
Yeah, no,
I was here
all of you. You know, I started off thinking, what am I going to say when they get to me? And now, like, after listening to all that, but I'll try to
just
get
think
back.
we're only talking about our reactions today when we start talking about the past and then to the future, which we're going to include you in. It'll get really interesting.
So I was right here on Earth Day in 1970. I was a freshman at Yale, and I went out into the Yale Green and participated in Earth Day, and I bought a belt that I wore for about 4 years. So this morning I crawled back into the back of my closet, and there it is.
Wow.
Haven't even seen it in 40 years. But
now you're going to start wearing, it's still a good
still fits. That's what my wife said. She said it still fits. Actually, I was 40 pounds heavier, and it fit me then.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
That's great.
Has flowers on it. The buckle is a flower, and there's flowers embroidered all over it. So I guess the point of that is when the first Earth Day happened, there was a lot more going on. In the Vietnam War, there were protests, there were rallies. Here in New Haven, the Black Panthers were on trial, and there was a big civil rights thing going on here. You know, you had Earth Day. There's just a lot of activity. It was a time when we were, as a society, people were thinking we were making a dramatic shift and change, and people were exploring different things. And we were going back to the land, right? We're going to go back and buy a farm somewhere, do things like that. So I think that was the context of the first Earth Day, and I remember that. So I think we all have to kind of put that into perspective of there was something bigger happening. I worked with Gaylord Nelson at the Wilderness Society, and Gaylord was asked to, on Earth Day, go around and talk to people about Earth Day, and I would go with him on that.
Oh,
so
no
I have
kidding.
some really funny stories about
that's
that.
great.
If we have time later, we can get into that one. But back to what you said, I think so. The effect of the first Earth Day on me that I think about now is that you know, that blue marble in space, and, you know, that, you know, we all are on one planet. But you know, picking up on what you're all saying, I really have to think now is, you know, so we had that realization of that wholeness at that time. But you know, you don't have to go in outer space to do that. You know, you can go right out in the woods and you can have that that experience. And I've had it, and I've worked with a lot of people that have had that too. So that was apparent. That awareness, we think, was apparent. And now, 50 years later, how could we possibly be where we are now, 50 years later? You know, so what I think is it's time to ask some really tough questions about who we are, what we're doing, what our institution is doing. I heard I'll flare this off here, right? In the previous session, somebody started talking about the politicization of climate change and what are we going to do about it, right? I don't know if I was paying total attention, but people started to talk about educating the kids. No, that is not the answer right now. We do not have the time right now. We can't kick this down and pass it along to the kids. I go through the same thing in forestry. You know, we want people to feel good about forest, and well, how do we do that? Educate the kids. No, don't have time. Used to have time. 50 years ago we had time. Don't have time now. We have to look at ourselves, the adults in the room, the institutions here, and ask the really tough questions about how we're going to solve this problem right now. And you talked about Yale University. I'm a forester. Yale owns 1 million acres of forest land. I know what they're doing with it. Tick, tick, tick.
Thank you. Break, because I just want to ask Lauren our timing. It's 12:15. Because we started a little late, just tell me how much time I've got so I can... Maybe another 20 minutes. Okay. Okay. So... Great. All right. So we've talked a little bit about where we are, that touched on the past, but where did that past sort of help you decide what you wanted to do with regard to Earth Day? And you have a shorter runway in a certain sense and are like boots on the ground. So tell us, you know, how you got to where you are and why, you know, I asked Rory to join us for a very, very specific reason. So go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I have less of past to draw on in my personal life, but I'm also an historian. And the reason for me that that we're in the situation that we're in right now is because of the Industrial Revolution. And we have to go back that far. We have to realize, and this is Extinction Rebellion's position as well as my own, is that we are fucked. Abject failure of institutions across the board. And petrocapitalism. Fossil-fueled capitalism is the reason we are where we are at. And we can trace that back to the Industrial Revolution and the attendant effects of that revolution. So what's sometimes called the Great Acceleration. Population, for example, prior to the Industrial Revolution, human population, slightly under 1 billion. 200 roughly years later, 7.5 billion. That's one example of the ecological effects of the Industrial Revolution. So we trace that through. We find that Exxon, of course, as we all know, and the other corporations knew about the effects of their activities, at least as early as the 70s, if not the 50s. And then we have the neoliberal era that emerges in the 70s and 80s, right after the same consciousness that produced Earth Day, and gives us, as Gore Vidal once said, a single party with two wings, the money party with two wings. Republicans and Democrats are equally culpable here, because again, the problem is capitalism, at least fossil-fueled capitalism. So all of these things, for me, I woke up in the world where this was already the case, right? We were already in what should have been acknowledged as being an emergency situation when I was born, let alone a few years ago when I first became, capable of addressing these types of issues on my own, right? Had the consciousness and education to understand and take action in an attempt to solve these issues. So this is where, when I arrived at Columbia, I had a pre-existing academic interest in this topic. From my interest in history, political theory, recognizing, if any of you are familiar with the political theorist Murray Bookchin, he was a deep influence on me, and recognizing transitioning from focusing on political theory and into social ecology. And so roughly around the time that Trump was elected, I realized in the same way that Extinction Rebellion realizes that we cannot expect institutions and those at the top to take the appropriate actions that are required to literally save the species. It's not going to come from above, it must rise from below. And so in like October, November 2018, there was an open letter issued in The Guardian, signed by Noam Chomsky and others, Noam Chomsky, whose work I follow very closely, in support of Extinction Rebellion. So I mentioned to Chip earlier, Extinction Rebellion, its one-year anniversary was yesterday. Declaration of Rebellion was 1 year and 1 day ago. And in that time, it's metastasized, grown around the world. There have been enormous amounts of arrests as a result of disruptive civil disobedience in the UK and elsewhere, including New York. So all of this has brought me to the point where I am willing, along with the rest of the members of Extinction Rebellion, to place my body and my freedom potentially on the line in order to disrupt business as usual and catalyze transformational change.
I want to try to make sure.
Oh, sure, I forgot about the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I'm sorry, but maybe we can go through about a minute each, because I want to follow up with another question, and then we'll turn it up to the audience, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Jeff.
So, I think that in my career where I'm now, I started out as an activist, but have been in the private sector for the last, 20 years. I've really seen this growing recognition in the private sector that we can be revolutionaries inside the private sector. And if you show people that it's good for business and good for the environment, they will do it. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing in New York, focusing on buildings in particular, is trying to figure out how to do that. I'll just give one quick example, and then we can go on. We've been working with major law firms in New York City when they move into new space. If you do what's called a deep energy retrofit, you can save an enormous amount of money. So they did a deep energy retrofit that cost about $500,000. The return on investment for that was 1 year. They're saving that amount of money year on year for 20 years on a lease. So just by pointing that out and then going around to other law firms and making the case pretty much to a person when we sit in these with managing partners at major international law firms, and we explain what White and Case did and why, and ask them to do it. Word for word, the response is, well, why wouldn't we want to do that?
Yeah.
So I think part of the challenge, while people are really shaking the system at its roots and calling on the institutions, we can do, it's not sexy, but it's actually very effective because in New York City, buildings are 70% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and globally, buildings are 40 to 50% in most urban areas. So if we can get that source of pollution down, that could make a very big difference. So that's what we're focusing on.
Is there a minute?
Sure. So in terms, I had mentioned earlier that that the work on a broadest sense that I try to do is change cultures that don't realize that they need or want to be changed. I agree with Jeff that there's so many layers. There's the private sector, there's the groups like Extinction Rebellion. They all have to work together, and they've got to push up. One of the ways that I work on my particular community is I've lived there for 23 years. I know it very well. I love it, but it needed to have a greater awareness about its environmental impact. It is right on Long Island Sound. It's in a watershed, and there was a lot that people just didn't understand. And I think that the way to do that is through raising awareness, through working with partners within that community that you understand. And in my particular example, it's a municipality, it's the city of Rye, but you also have the ability to do this within groups or within corporations, and then figuring out who's going to deliver the message for change. And in my particular experience, sometimes it would be me, sometimes it would be a group that was that was trusted and had influence. Sometimes it was an elected official. But that ability to deliver the message from a variety of different ways and sources is the way that I see that you can have this cultural transformation. And then once you have a cultural transformation in that particular community, then it's boots on the ground to move on to the next group or the next municipality. And that's what I've been doing for in the last few years.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah. Going through Yale College and the forestry school here, some of us come out here with this idea that we're going to be a leader and actually try to help the planet, which is why after 50 years it's kind of disheartening. So I asked the tough questions of myself. How did I let this happen? What did I do in my career that this is where we are? And I ask that question every day, but I still go to work every day because from the beginning I wanted to make a difference, but I decided early on that I would go into the woods and develop a skill, actually understand how to do something, with my hands rather than just thinking and developing policy to actually understand that. I became an expert in forest management. I know how, and others are with me, to manage forest lands and make them 2 to 3 times more productive. We can do that, and they're still beautiful, and we're helpful for wildlife, and we create we can show you it. We've got track records of doing that. The problem is our capitalistic system won't allow us to do it. So, we do it on our lands, but we can't get the other people to do that. So that's the problem. I take a little bit of cheer in the fact that the other quote is do what you can in the place you are at the time you're at, however that is. So in the big sense, I don't know, culture change. Yes, we need to do all this transition and rebel, and I'm with it. But right now, actually, I think we can change buildings and how buildings are built. And your numbers are right. And a lot of that energy is in when you actually build the building out of concrete and steel. We've got 7.7 billion people on the planet right now. We're going to have 2 billion more in the next 30 years. And a lot of people are moving to cities. We're going to build so many buildings out of concrete and steel that we're going to toast the planet. So one of the things that at least I can be part of is changing that and having it built, a lot of them built out of wood instead of concrete and steel. And that's the contribution I can make in the space that I'm in.
It's interesting that you brought up about, what did I do to get us here? Because I think about growing up when I did, really into music, the Talking Heads, Life During Wartime, and you're sitting and David Byrne is singing that song, oh, there's my beautiful house, there's my beautiful wife. How did I get here? And
What have I done?
What have I done? and that, to me, is like the underlying theme. If all of us, some of us will make it, some of us won't, 30 years from today, sitting at a dining room table with your family or friends, what did I do to get us to this point? What decisions did I make every day of the week of the 30 years from today to that time made me get to this point? How did I impact my family, my community, my state, my country, my planet? And I often think about visioning and goals, and one, like some catchy little thing, it led me to another song that somehow encapsulates at least the feeling that I think that we all need to take. And it's an Aretha Franklin song of RESPECT, where we respect ourselves, our friends, our family, our enemies, our planet, and what we do and how we do it. And if we can go through that life with respect, we're going to end up in a much better place. But how that all works, until that point, we have to act fast. So I want to open it up to our big audience here for questions or comments or participation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We feel your laundry, or I'm giving it as an example, but there are many places where we're not exercising our power as consumers. So I think we could be more aware of how, but that's really an act of rebellion. I mean, we're trapped. What do you do? Do your own soap at home, or it really is a challenge. So I think another thing, example with buildings in New York. All the eastern coast is a pathway for migration for birds.
Yeah.
I've seen the news. And New York keeps building more and more glass buildings because it's cheaper.
Right.
And so how do we manage the building industries more aware? It's a big, we have a big number. So I'm just thinking of how to walk the talk in a more effective way, being more aware of where we are, because we're really prisoners in some, what are the options?
Yeah. Yeah, Terry.
You talked about that haze and Earth Day 50 years ago. The 50th Earth Day is coming April. A lot of things are going to be happening.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting opportunity to be out and sending messages to other people in our country and around the world. Each of you are in different groups associated with different people. What are each of you planning to do on Earth Day 50?
Great question.
Good question.
I can answer quickly. So Extinction Rebellion typically plans large-scale disruptions on a rolling 6-month basis. And we will be holding some international week of rebellion probably the week before Earth Day and into Earth Day. So if you want to participate in that in your local area, take a look at our website and see what's happening. That's what I'll be doing.
So the New York City Climate Action Alliance is going to be sponsoring an event with all of the people that are involved in these efforts to decarbonize buildings in New York City to talk about what can be done and to bring both the owners of the buildings and the tenants in the buildings together to implement energy retrofits, which will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So again, it's not terribly sexy. We're not going to be marching in the streets, but there are 1 million buildings in New York City, and each one of them is generating greenhouse gas emissions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's what we're going to be doing.
I was in New York for the first Earth Day, and Fifth Avenue was closed, and it really wasn't quite a happening.
It'd be great to do something like that again.
Yeah.
So Earth Day, I must confess I haven't really thought specifically about the day. I have a blog that I just started a few months ago, so I'll probably write about Earth Day. But as I mentioned, I'm on the City Council, and one of the laws that has languished is our tree ordinance. We have a tree ordinance, but a few years ago, the Rise Sustainability Committee, the committee that I had started, and the Conservation Commission had tried to beef it up because it really was ineffective. And we launched a campaign to do so, and the legislative body at the time, during the public hearings, tabled it indefinitely. So this was literally 2 years ago. I've already spoken with some of my fellow council members, and we said, well, 2020 is the time to resurrect the update of the tree ordinance. So that is probably one of the sort of green pieces of legislation that I will be sponsoring and pushing forward in 2020.
I'll probably write something similar to what we've been talking about here. I think as somebody that experienced the first one, as the years go by, you start to have some sort of perspective. And so I'll probably write something for our website and our blogs, and be looking for some connection from our Build It with Wood program to what you're talking about.
We'll have to talk.
Yeah, if something's going on, that's where we want to plug in.
You guys should.
But I haven't attended an Earth Day celebration on that day for quite a few years, and it sort of becomes like my wife, we're active. Like she said, there's a rally, let's go to the Women's March, let's do this. And sometimes I have to say, actually, I have to finish our Building with Wood climate wedge report. That's what I need to do. Somebody else can do the rally. So it becomes a trade-off sometimes with those kind of things.
So I don't have something definitive yet. I'm thinking of doing one of two things. I'm going to either set up a conference locally where I live, or I'm going to connect with Rory. I'm going to go march.
We should have 30 million people in the streets on Earth Day. How about that for a goal?
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I do think that I want to mention before we close, and yeah.
So I think this forum is a perfect opportunity to call on a wealthy, powerful member of the establishment, so to speak, because the education has become part of the military-industrial complex, for lack of a better definition. I mean, our educational institutions are so incredibly wealthy now. Relative to 50 years ago. They were powerful, and they influential, but now they're powerful, influential, and they are darn rich. And why not use this forum to say, Yale, which it was not my idea, it was Miranda Massey's idea, why don't you divest from all of your fossil fuel holdings and do it on Earth Day? Make a statement, take a stand. And we all can do this. We can all ask the institution to make that announcement. Miranda Massey did it yesterday, and she's still in the back of my head, because I think what a powerful statement to make, because that's real action.
And I go ahead, Lauren.
I don't know if you guys know about the 50 years celebration of education in Yale College, and 150 years as the first women at Yale, period. So like we're in this broader space of, I think what fits into this dispatches from the future concept of celebrating how far we've come, taking stock, and figuring out the next trajectory. Following up on what you just said, there is definitely a space for us to talk about how a piece of yes or how this conversation is evolving can connect to what happens in April, because that's just a few months away. So whether that is renewing and clarifying and putting a timeline on divestment from an alumni standpoint, or it's celebrating people who remember what it was like to be out on the green and connecting with current students through Yale or the other campaigns that are happening on campus. So there is a space for that, and it's on a timeline that is more expedient than some of the other things that we think about. So just putting it out there. As
Great.
I have more information, I will share that with our alumni community so that people are aware of opportunities to collaborate, get connected, show up, do something, hold Yale accountable, all of those things.
Can I follow up? And
companies or institutions that have money can divest. All of that is nice, but we're still trapped in buying a lot of unsustainable products. So and I don't want. I also don't think it's environment versus development or environment versus being richer. You know, it's not a either or. I think we can be prosperous and be sustainable. So I just wanted to.
well, is it what they're like the cliche, act locally, think globally, right? Or you have to act short term, think long term.
But I think when you want a huge number of people, like let's say it's a different topic, but many people working on the food industry or the restaurants just stop going to the restaurants. Most of them are immigrant workers. They
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
nobody's cooking your food.
I think we're close to time, so maybe each of us 30-second wrap up. Is that good? And we'll just kind of roll through. All right. Okay. Yeah. Last words and important things to suggest.
Yes, absolutely. In the vein of visions of the future, et cetera, I just want to briefly mention that XR is future oriented. The entire purpose of Extinction Rebellion is planning for a transition to a survivable system of social organization, which entails the transferring power away from capitalist elites in the global neoliberal system and into the hands of ordinary people, deliberative democratic bodies. And so if you want to learn more about the mechanism of social change that Extinction Rebellion relies upon, you can read this book or these books, one of which is by the co-founder of the movement, Roger Hallam, and he develops and articulates an entire civil resistance model based on successful movements around the world along these lines. And so that's what we're shooting for.
Excellent. Jeff?
So I wanted to answer your question. I think that we need to break the stranglehold on Congress that the fossil fuel industry has. And there are different ways to do that, but I think we need to really ramp up boycotts of companies that are not spending money in Congress in a way that promotes climate change legislation. And you know, I just met a climate scientist who founded an organization called Women Power the Planet. And they have this very catchy idea, which is that their members are going to break up with their banks or the banks that are funding fossil fuels. So that was a very effective tool in the civil rights movement, consumer boycotts. I think we need to be thinking about that more.
Great. Yeah, to follow along with that, I think that individuals, organizations, grassroots groups are working their tails off to try to affect change, and they should continue to do so. But what I would like to see more are the large-scale institutions that talk the talk, to your point, that they actually walk the walk. So yes, you and I, we can give up single-use plastic. We can do all of those things, and we should continue to do so. I'm not saying that it's an either or. They're not mutually exclusive. But what I would like to see is more involvement and more action. The dean of the public health school put it so eloquently this morning. He said, I want to see less information sharing and more action on the part of the school. And yes, we can have all of that information sharing, but let's start with our large institutions taking more action.
There's a recent article in Bloomberg, and some secretary at the UN was talking about climate change, and what he was saying was that we need to change agriculture and forestry and our natural lands. We need to shift what we're doing on them right now. And if we do that, we can actually give ourselves a buffer of 20 years. So 20 years from now, we'll have done everything we can to fill the forest with carbon and to change agriculture. And then we won't be able to do any more at that point in time. Hopefully at that time, the other things will click in, and that, I look at that and say, that looks like the only possible path here, because all these things we're talking about, we just can't bring them on fast enough. So let's do that, and that fits right into my work. That's what we're saying in New England. Right. We've studied exactly that effect, and it can be huge. We just need to stop building buildings with steel and concrete, and we need to get these 210,000 forest landowners in New England to start doing a little bit different work on their property. There's over 30 billion trees in the ground right now. We don't have to plant them. We just have to manage them right, and we can get the carbon benefit from it.
So we've got great ideas. Yesterday and today, we've had great ideas. We've got to get them implemented. And we've got an infrastructure that is delaying. We need Rory to step it up. And we've got to help him do it. We've got to accelerate what we individually are doing to make that all happen. We've got to get out and vote, because we've got to change the attitude, in my opinion, of people in this country that government is not the problem. It is not what Reagan said. It is a part of the solution. Short term, we've got a problem, but we can change it. So we can change it, and we should. And we can get out and make a government a partner in implementing all of these changes on so many different levels. That's my feeling. Anything else anybody wants to mention? Last words, you guys have it, and then food. So otherwise, I thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh, that'd be great.
Oh yeah, let's hear at least one.
Yeah. So Gaylord, after he retired from political work, he worked for the Wilderness Society, had its own office down in D.C. I was up here managing the New England office, but I'd be in D.C., so I was working with Gaylord often. And when Earth Day came along, I was living in Worcester, Massachusetts. This was probably 1998. And we were in a big rambling Victorian house, and Gaylord was asked to speak on Earth Day, so he came to Worcester. And of course, I was his guide for the day, the weekend, and bringing him around. He was in his 80s, so he needed a break at the end of the day so he could do his evening session. So I said, oh, come back to my house, you know, put you in the spare bedroom, and you have a couple hours to relax. So my son at that time was 6, 7 years old, and he had 2 little buddies that were 5 or 6 or 7 years old. And so I'd bring Gayhorn, I'd put him up on the second floor in a nice dark room, and I kind of walk out into the yard. And as soon as I walk out into the door, these 3 kids burst into the door from outside. They didn't have any shirts on, and they had these sticks and helmets and hats and stuff. They were playing some war game or something.
Yeah.
Boom, they're in the house up the stairs, and I'm after them. I couldn't catch him. They burst into his room. He's lying there, you know, and these kids are standing on the chairs around him, like, you know, yelling or something. And Gayla was so smooth. Yeah, she could talk across the aisle. He just said, oh, what? Finally, I catch up with them, you know, like, get out of here. You shouldn't be disturbing Senator Nelson. And they're pushing him down the stairs, and one of them says, Senator, I thought he was a general.
That's so great. Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining us. I appreciate it.